So tonight, I'm really excited. One of the members, a member of another chapter of Electric Auto, reached out to me and told me that PowerFlex had helped their school system install almost 30 chargers at one school at no cost to the school district. So that definitely caught my attention. And then she put me in touch with Patrick Kelly of PowerFlex. He's the VP of operations, and they do large scale installations, charging installations. And he's going to talk to us here in just a minute and tell us all about it. But it was really interesting. He told me that I think they installed 168 chargers at Intuit recently. They've installed the 30 at the Los Altos school, and then a lot more around Los Altos. So Patrick, I will let you tell us all about it.
Well, first I want to say thank you to Sybil for making the introduction to you, Elaine. So Sybil, thank you very much for your support on the PowerFlex side.
Thanks. And one more thing. So if anybody has questions, you can put them in the chat, and then at the end, we'll open it up so that Patrick can do some Q&A. And actually, Sybil from the Los Altos area is on with us tonight too. So she will, she'll be here to take some questions too.
So I'm a recovering hydrogen addict. I started a hydrogen company. I drove a Toyota Mirai. I think hydrogen has a great use case on the heavy side of things and probably for planes and shipping. But EV charging is such a great user experience, as all of you know. And I think what really drew us to PowerFlex originally, and my experience has been back at EDF Renewables for about 4 years now. And I led our acquisition of PowerFlex about 1.5 years ago, because I actually met George, the founder, at Los Altos High School. And the day I met him there, I knew that like this was the future. This is the future, which is large scale electric vehicle charging. And I think as anybody that's driven an EV knows that we really need to make it ubiquitous. And I think the best analogy is 10 years ago, if you walked around at an airport and tried to plug your computer into an outlet, good luck finding an outlet. Now there's a plug anywhere. You can't, walk 2 steps without having a new place to plug in the airport. And that's because of that electrification of gadgets and everything else. And the industry realized and airports realized that we have to make it available to everybody. Otherwise, there's going to be fights in the airport. And now we're seeing the same thing. I'm sure everybody has their stories of fights over cords, and we want to alleviate those problems. So it's a bit of a background from my standpoint, and I will share my screen at this point. If you don't mind, this is going to be a really energy geeky, wonky presentation because it's what's so important for EV charging. PowerFlex is a leader in integrated energy solutions. We've deployed over 4,500 smart charging stations and integrated now into our own entity. We're doing more and more on the solar side and commercial storage. So the PowerFlex that Elaine knew as a 4-person startup a few years ago, we've now turned it into an 80-person company deploying really every capability under the sun, because we know that this is what has to happen for distributed energy. You all probably know that transportation, just I think 2 years ago, passed electricity generation as the #1 contributor to greenhouse gases in the United States, right? So over time, the grid has gotten a little bit cleaner, not excessively cleaner, but we really want to attack both of these problems. We have to clean transportation, we need to clean electricity. And as you can see, really the same thing, that we have these the two biggest components, right? 55% of greenhouse gases can be solved in one fell swoop with clean energy and electrification. So some of you, every one of you, I'm sure knows a ton about the EV market, but I want to give you it, I want to paint it through the lens that we look at the EV market. You probably know that California completely dominates the EV landscape, right? The next closest state, New York, has 1/10 of as many electric vehicles as California. And it's been at it for a while, for a long time. Part of it because California's been going at it for so long, part of it because we have low carbon fuel standards and all of these incentives. But it's a really interesting to see the difference. And it really paints the picture for what I'm trying to highlight with large scale deployments, right? Most people know how the progression goes. EVs multiply through mitosis, right? One EV driver drives an EV, they talk to their colleague at work, and then they suddenly split and then get a new, you have a new EV driver. And then those two create two more EV drivers because of that power of conveyance between people. And now that we're at that accelerated phase, you also know that when you install two EV charging stations, you know that in a year or two, you're going to need to have 20. And then a year or two later, you're probably going to need 200. And that's what's required for this type of accelerated growth. The other piece of this equation is that when we put in all of these electric vehicles, they can have significant impact to a utility bill, whether that's an apartment complex or a workplace. And if you drive a small electric vehicle like a i3 or that beautiful van that I drive, the Pacific hybrid, plug-in hybrid, you're getting consuming somewhere between 8 to 12 kilowatt hours per day. And the average office building consumes about 10 kilowatt hours per employee per day. So simply adding electric vehicles has the potential to double the overall energy consumption. And even worse than that, it has the power to change the power and what is seen on the grid. This right here is a visual of the duck curve. And I don't think that Zoom is great about this, but can somebody raise your hand on Teams or on, on Zoom if you've heard of the duck curve? And for those that haven't, I want to highlight why this is such an important concept. This up in the upper right was presented by, all right, got them some thumbs up. Thank you, Marty. And Marty, welcome. This slide is very popular in energy circles, and it was presented about 8 years ago now by the National Renewable Energy Lab. And basically it shows that, before solar, you had this kind of like wavy line, but it stayed relatively simple. And the peak would happen somewhere between 6 and 9 p.m., but there was a big daytime peak as well. Once you layer in all the solar, you think of all of the assets that need to ramp down and then ramp back up. So natural gas and things of the sort that have to run while the sun isn't shining, at least now, until we can solve some of those other problems. They have to ramp down while the sun rises. And then when the sun starts to set, those natural gas peaker plants have to turn on in a very short period of time. And this was just from a few years ago. I also, I'm going to show today. So this is today's curve. If you've ever gone to the California Independent System Operator, you'll see this is what happens. This is this huge gap. And right now we're looking at an average ramp of 10 gigawatts of power in a very short period of time. Across that period, we're looking at about 28,000 megawatts of power. And I think what was really telling to us when we looked at this market at whole is to think to ourselves, what is going to happen when we have so many electric vehicles that we are going to have enough vehicles to really overload the grid. The other conceptual point is that evening peak is the dirtiest and the costliest. So it's not only hurting your wallet if you're plugging in at 6 to 9 p.m., it's drawing on the dirtiest electrons that you could possibly get while you're on the grid. And SDG&E has been pushing these time of use perspectives for a while now, right? Now, and I'm going to go back to full screen, apologies. Workplace charging and really daytime charging enables more renewable energy. If everybody charged at home, even with quote unquote smart charging, you would have a really big peak in the middle of the night. And this is assuming that there's a lot of smart charging that levels out this load. what's a bigger realization is that our net demand, if you look at this, this is in terms of megawatt hours. So 22,000 megawatt hours going all the way up to 28,000 megawatt hours. If you've been listening to the news, the governor's target for 2030 is 5 million electric vehicles on the road by 2030. If every single one of those electric vehicles plugged in to a level 2 charger at home, it would pull 35 gigawatt hours. So 35, that's not even on this chart, 35 gigawatts of power. And it wouldn't need it for that long, but that's a lot of power. And it has the potential to completely disrupt our grid if it's not properly managed. Moving this load into the daytime when we really need it is one of the most important things that electric vehicle drivers can do. And prioritizing daytime charging is really important for enabling more renewable energy. Some of the other components that you all may be aware of is that CalGreen is driving basically the building codes is now mandating 10% effective July 1st, 10% of all new buildings will be required to have EV charging ready. These are great things, but it also comes at very large capital costs and interconnections and the potential for a complete rewiring of the grid. And that's where we really have to come into this with a load management perspective. You all know what the difference is between charging levels, so I'm going to skip that. But we see ourselves as the Swiss Army knife of EV charging. We offer low DC level 2 charging and DC fast charging at a variety of levels that are as a lot of large numbers problem. Every vehicle has kind of a different use case and a different need. So when I plug in a plug-in hybrid, you know, a lot of people have like plug-in hybrid shaming, but realistically, we want them to plug in every day. Otherwise, they'll be using their gas tank. And in order to get there, we want them plugging in every day, even though they don't need that much energy. The small battery electric vehicles, anybody that's driven a Nissan Leaf or an i3 knows that you have really high range anxiety. You don't have that big of a battery, and you want to plug in a lot more often. But then you have these other larger batteries where you can push your charging from day to day, or you have a lot more flexibility on that charging. And flexibility with charging and load is very important for aligning to our future state of renewable energy. So we make a really strong push, not only for apartment complexes and workplaces, that the solution is more chargers, not waitlisting and not moving your cars and trying to play this game of Tetris every single time. I think everybody is probably aware of that, 2-hour time limit or 4-hour time limit. And I think there's a place for that in DC scale. It just can't happen. When you're talking about a parking garage that might have 100 or 200 charging stations, if you try to make those people move every minute, it's a non-starter. And in particular for use cases like one of our sites at Children's Hospital of Los Angeles, where we have 60 charging stations, those hospital workers and essential workers, they're on shift for 10, 12 hours. They have to be able to leave their vehicle the whole time. When you do that, we're able to really spread load that energy across the time. And when we're allowed to spread load that, we take what would otherwise be a very peaky load, and sometimes with solar and storage, we can dig a big hole and fill it back in with both battery power as well as electric vehicle charging. We can do that both on site as well as integrated in with the grid. And I think that vertical integration and integrated energy management is what's really important for reducing the size of the interconnection, right? And that's what allows us to satisfy for all of those different charging stations, even if you have a small panel. We've also done a lot of projects with UCSD, for instance, where we've shown demand responsibility to go from 100 kilowatts to 30 kilowatts in a span of a very long time. UCSD has been an incredible partner with us, especially to test all of the different limits on how electric vehicle charging can be integrated with the grid. And that doesn't mean vehicle to grid. It just means integrated with the grid. It means when we get a signal that we can shape our load according to what the grid needs. And in most cases, many drivers don't even care. If you're plugged in for 8 hours, 10 hours during the day, all you want is that vehicle to be full by the time you get back out to the parking lot. And from the market standpoint, I'm going to leave you with this last concept. In 2017, we had a solar eclipse that cut across California, and you all probably remember that. At the time, it resulted in a 6 gigawatt drop in solar production in a very short period of time. There was a lot of prep work in order to do that. And it's the question of, as we come in towards these renewable resources and we have predictable events for when the next eclipse happens. And I think that really relies on the ability to do large scale load management, both with electric and starting with electric vehicle charging. I'm going to stop there before I go back into some of the deeper details onto the PowerFlex solution and ask if there's any questions from a market standpoint before I jump into specific things that may be applicable, that are going to be applicable for incentives coming down in San Diego. So I will look. Are there any questions that, or do you want me to go jump right back into the presentation? Always more fun when it's interactive. I don't know if everybody's muted or.
Yeah, anybody have any questions?
I have Stan from New Jersey, actually.
Hi, Stan.
Thank you. I'm leading the Central Jersey chapter, and I'm once in a while visiting the presentation by San Diego chapter. And so I enjoyed your presentation so much. And just regarding the imbalance caused by solar production in California, can you comment on what is happening in Texas? So when they built solar, they tried to make it west biased, so they get more production towards the end of the day. And also what is happening here in New Jersey, that the governor, well, it's not just New Jersey, but around the world, is lots of offshore wind, right? And so you get completely different load, not load, but the generation curve. What do you think would happen if there is a little bit more balance and thinking about how these renewable resources are designed? Thank you.
That's a great question. And I think it's a really interesting perspective where in the Midwest, and I've given some other slides, this is very California focused for right now, but in the Midwest, the overproduction of renewable energy tends to be wind energy in the middle of the night, not solar energy in the middle of the day. So what may be prescribed in the Midwest may be different for the best integration between vehicles and the grid. And the way I see it really is that in an ideal state, vehicles are always plugged into the grid, that they're grid assets, and that in this eventual state that people are paid for always being plugged into the grid. We've got a ways to go before that. So I have a few more slides and I can transition into load management, and I'll take 5 more minutes on that, Elaine, and then a few comments on San Diego specific. And if you have more questions, I'll capture them on the chat window as well. So we provide a full suite of energy solutions, but I'm really going to get into the part that is the most interesting to me. Per the National Electric Code, electric vehicle charging stations need to be treated as continuous load. What that means is that you have to have enough of a breaker and enough power to each one of these such that if every single one of them plugged in and wanted full power at the same time, you wouldn't trip a breaker. And that's really expensive to build the grid out like that. We're able, with a UL listing, and it's approved by a carve out from the National Electric Code, to do 4, 5, 6 times as many. So with this same situation, we could go from 18 charging stations to 72 charging stations without even upgrading any of the electrical board. And you might ask, well, I could just do that with a level 1 station. Well, that's not really true. The needs of the driver itself. This is the key part of adaptive load management. It's not just vehicle and grid integration, it's site integration and the site limitations. And I have a use case that I'll show that later on. But this is the core technology out of Caltech that really drove us towards PowerFlex. When you stack all of these this power up, you can have an overload situation. But when you push all this power down below the power limit, all of these cars would have otherwise been plugged in at the same time. We can satisfy everybody. How long was I out for?
Oh, about 30 seconds.
Sorry about that. All right, so I will highlight that if you're able to see this is where we select the, when are you going to be leaving from the parking lot, and that allows us to plan for the power as well, right? And then I'll skip on these as well, but the load management system basically integrates all of these energy assets together. So I'm going to skip through some of those other clients, but one of the key components that we're able to do in California is operate under a zero cost model. And this is a key part. With low carbon fuel standards, we provide a very simplistic use case for whether it's a multifamily dwelling or a workplace by not charging networking fees and simply using this low carbon fuel standards to offset our operating costs, as well as driving through some of the incentives. So a great example of this is with Arden Homeowners Association in San Francisco. And this is the if you build it, they will come philosophy. We initially started with 51. While we're in the middle of construction, the demand increased such that they said, you know what, add 31 more. And then it increased again, and they said, you know what, add 58 more. And we now have 140 charging stations at this homeowners association, where there's a total of about 205 parking stalls. So it really is a case of building and electrifying every parking space you can possibly imagine. And without load management, we would have had to stop a long time ago. We wouldn't have been able to do these last 58 charging stations, and we're able to satisfy all of the drivers on that single site. Another case is with 23andMe, where we have a combination of 100 level 2s and 1 DC fast charger. And this combination effort is really important because sometimes you have people that just, they need faster charge, and that's where it overlays both with the DC fast charging as well as with the level 2 load management. And then a picture of our own site here in Rancho Bernardo, where we have 280 kW battery, about 400 kW of solar, and 43 EV charging stations. So I'm going to stop at that point and then highlight that while the incentives in San Diego, Cali VIP, that money disappeared in about 90 seconds. So there's no money left from the Cali VIP bucket, but the next round of projects coming through is SDG&E Power Your Drive Part 2 will be opening up. And I apologize, I don't have a slide for it. And part of that is because while it's been approved, the details have not come out yet. Right now, it looks like it's about a $40 million program, and it will be installing charging stations throughout San Diego County. And there will be the option this time, which we're really excited about. There will be the option this time for hosts to actually own the stations. The last time with Power Your Drive, there was a lot of difficulty with easements and things of the sort. So this chance now, anybody can own it, and $40 million is going to go a pretty long ways, and that's going to be applicable and open to schools and the sort. And like Sybil said, we'd be happy to help support you on transacting that entire effort, as well as through the rebate process in order to deliver a similar project to you all.
And Patrick, we have a question. Are you only doing business in California, or do you do installations in other states?
We do installations throughout North America. Per the slide that I showed before, where California has 10 times as many, it trends us towards California, but we're certainly open to everywhere. The one thing that we don't do is we typically don't do a onesie twosie charger. Our load management controller really only makes sense when you do 10, 20, 30, 40, 100. So generally speaking, outside of California, we limit ourselves to about 20 charging stations as a minimum.
Excellent. All right. And any other questions? Oh, let's see. What's the typical cost for such an installation, say of 20 to 40?
Yeah.
Chargers?
So the typical cost that you'll get quoted for that is probably going to be about $10,000 per, so 200 to 400,000. If SDG&E, on SDG&E's program, they were installing them at $20,000 per level 2. Those numbers are unsustainable. We typically install at under 5,000, assuming it's 20 chargers, we typically install under $5,000 per level 2. So for a 20 station installation, that's typically going to be right around $100,000. In most cases, the incentive is going to be right around $5,000. So like with Sybil, that's where that break even came, and it ended up being a no cost on those projects up there.
Excellent. And Sybil, do you want to jump in and tell us a little bit about the installation up by you?
I would love to tell you about our situation. In 2015, we had one teacher who was driving an EV, and we got 4 ports, 2 Clipper Creek charging stations in July of 2015. And by July of 2016, we had 6 teachers. You know, it's not easy for a teacher to go out. It was hard for them. The 6 knew each other, but they'd have to move the cars around in order to have everybody charged by the end of the day. And so we were thrilled that in meeting George, who had just, I guess, received a large grant from Bay Area Air Quality Management District, which is our section of the ARB, or CARB as some call it. And after let's see, it must have been, I'm going to check my date here. Fall of 2018, we had 29 level 2 chargers. And by February, before the schools shut down here, we had 27. So from 1 to 6 to 27 teachers and staff driving in EVs, I am convinced that having an EVSE installation in the workplace is one of the best ways to encourage EV adoption in the regular population. I mean, we're all enthusiasts and we're very committed to electric transportation, but charging in the workplace, one of the best ways to get the ordinary person to think, because they do talk to each other if it's at a specific workplace. And if you have any questions for me, I'm happy to answer them.
So Sybil, did PowerFlex take care of kind of like managing the grants and the incentives and all of that, or how does that work?
So from our end at the district office, so to speak, all the associate superintendent had to do was to sign 2 letters. One said, yes, we own the property that these charging stations are going into, and 2, we give PowerFlex permission to do that. And they did everything. They did whatever permits were necessary. They did whatever, there wasn't a lot of trenching on our campus, but there was at other campuses. I should add that there are now over 300 EV charging stations at every K through 12 school in our one city. And they're open to the public after school hours. So it's a real boon. Yes, PowerFlex did absolutely everything. All we had to do was watch them. Dig the trenching, put in the power management system,
Excellent.
headache free.
Nice. All right, and then we have a couple of questions here. So do they need the app every time they plug in?
You definitely
So
need the app to start the electrons flowing.
It does depend on the site. There are some sites where we have we let people plug in straight. So it depends on the site host. That the vast majority of the time we do restrict it. Certainly in situations where people need to pay to play. Now, there's a new communication standard that's going to be coming out with newer vehicles in the next couple of years, where the vehicle and the station will be able to communicate with each other. And it's really our goal. Nobody's out there being able to do that right now, but you want to be able to just plug your vehicle in and you don't have to touch an app or anything. It just knows what you want. It knows your preferences and it knows your willingness to pay. And I think that happens to answer the users like simple. I totally agree. We let the site host determine the cost of the electricity because they're the ones paying the electric bill. And it depends. We guide them towards the right solution. Some people, we usually try to keep it down low, where like the marginal cost of electricity might be 15 cents per kilowatt hour, and drive them towards those rates. One of the things that we do for simplicity is that's why we load manage instead of making people make those decisions, we do it without them having to worry about it or know about it. We have some sites where we actually do have price signals. And then we have a willingness to pay button where it says, keep charging as long as it's below 12 cents. And then if it goes up to 15 or 18 cents, and that's the case with Los Altos High School District, where it's aligned with solar production. So when the solar's overproducing, it's only 2 cents per kilowatt hour, I believe, Sybil, is the rate there. And then it's got a ceiling of 15 cents if it's in the middle of the night or when the solar is not producing.
The app is especially important for us at the school site because if every teacher plugged in at 7 a.m. and they didn't have the power management system, they didn't have the app to say how much energy they needed. 7 a.m. there would be a tremendous peak demand for electricity. And it was nice to know that the power management system shaves that peak off.
Very cool.
So I
All
dropped
right.
my email address in there. I think it's all the way at the top of this chat window, but feel free to reach out to me if you want any support on any projects that you might have coming down the pipeline, or if you have any other questions. I love geeking out on energy, so.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much, Patrick. And just to be clear, so you do primarily workplace, school, and multi-unit homes charging, large scale charging installations.
Anything large scale, fleet, you name it.
Perfect.
I would say generally speaking, minimum 10 to 20 in California.
Excellent. Thanks. So if anybody runs into anybody that is in charge of a school district or a school or an apartment building or a workplace, give them Patrick's information. I sent 2 people to him just in the last week, since it's people have these questions, and I'm honestly not real sure how do I find out about all of those incentives and grants and all of that. So send them PowerFlex's way and let them help them out. So thank you so much, Patrick. We really appreciate it.
My pleasure.
All right. So again, thanks so much to Patrick Kelly, and it's Patrick Kelly at powerflex.com.